Hello. My aim in this work is to engage an intersection in the literature on friendship, selfhood, and role-playing games. To do this, I must develop a working definition of friendship by paralleling how friendships and selves develop and are maintained or dissolved over time. From here, I will examine a particular space wherein friendship can develop, thrive, or fail by introducing the social space of role-playing games. By elaborating what makes role-playing games what they are, and how they represent a quintessentially human process of storytelling, we will see how the friendships developed in these spaces are as, if not more, strong than friendships developed elsewhere. I'll conclude by examining the adaptability of TRPGs, tabletop role-playing games, into digital spaces as a means for enabling friendship even in periods of isolation. Friendship represents a spectrum whose boundaries are fuzzy and inappropriately represented by any table, but the heuristic value of categories like those presented here serve as useful conceptual aids rather than deterministic claims. The closer one is to the casual end, the more likely that such a friendship will be dominated by instrumental concerns, demanding a level of regular instrumental reciprocity as necessary. The closer one is to the best side, the more likely such a friendship will appreciate the other as an end in themselves. While reciprocity still exists on this end of the spectrum, it is not needed regularly given the durability of the friendship within the habitus of those involved. One need not provide regular proof of friendship. The friendship is assumed, and it will continue this way unless something significant changes the individuals. The casual end is typified by pleasure as the sole aim of the friendship, whereas the closer towards the best end one gets, the more likely pleasure will be an outcome of an unconditional appreciation of the other. Lastly, agency is necessary anywhere on this spectrum for the relationship to be active rather than merely reactive. All of these elements play into what I call living friendships, typified by regular interaction to confirm and reconfirm similarities. I will break similarities into two categories: experience and interest similarities. Experience similarities represent the spaces and times shared by individuals, anything from a shared class to surviving the same catastrophe. These can range from singular to regular occurrences. The catastrophe only happened once, while the class meets every week. Interest similarities represent a different vector of friendship. Consideration of what kind of living friendship develops and maintains itself requires an eye to both experience and interest similarities. The more regular interaction via experience similarity and the stronger one's interest similarities, the more likely a friendship will develop and tend towards the best end. From this, two further questions must come about. How do friendships initially develop, and how do friendships change or not over time? To answer both these questions, I must first parallel our account of friendship with George Herbert Mead's account of selfhood. Mead argues that the self develops through our process to objectify and our interaction with others in ongoing social and linguistic processes. Blumer elaborates by arguing that objects are anything that can be designated or referred to, implying that meaning is not intrinsic to the object, but arises from how the person is initially prepared to act towards it, and that all objects are social products, and that they're formed and transformed by the defining process that takes place in social interaction. Selfhood is thus a process which not only allows for objectification, and by extension reflexivity, but requires it. Reflexivity points to another essential component for selfhood: agentive human action. According to Blumer, to act, one has to identify what he wants, establish an objective, map out a prospective line of behavior, note and interpret the actions of others, size up their situation, and frequently spur oneself on in the face of dragging dispositions or discouraging settings. By being able to objectify things, to stand over against them, and to put oneself in position of acting toward it rather than automatically responding to it, one becomes capable of acting rather than merely reacting to external pressures. The role of human action in selfhood demonstrates its participatory nature, which, as Blumer argues, is always incomplete and undergoing development instead of jumping from one completed state to another. These same elements are as necessary for friendship as selfhood, with the former requiring functional, agentive selves which can objectify themselves as a means for comparison and connection to others. Both selfhood and friendship develop as ongoing processes requiring others and the capacity to objectify, with selfhood developing the prerequisite agency that friendship requires. So, how do friendships initiate? One can purposefully seek to develop friendships by seeking out spaces to test the waters and see whether interest similarities exist amongst those who they share experiences with. They can also happen accidentally when a shared experience similarity reveals that interest similarities exist. An example of purposeful development might be a game night where you know no one but you're seeking to meet people. An accidental example could be bumping into someone frequently enough on transit to eventually engage in conversation. But once established, how do friendships maintain themselves? Well, Parks and Floyd identified how frequency of interaction played a relatively minor role in the self-understandings of friendships. And this is in keeping with the experience of many who are separated for long periods of time but remain close or best friends. Mead supports this by arguing one can essentially talk to yourself, but that this process of abstraction cannot continue indefinitely. The process of thinking for Mead is simply an inner conversation of gestures, which in its completion implies the expression of thought to an audience. Friendships are simply a more complicated conversation of gestures, where the interests of individuals represent such an inner conversation, seeking expression before an audience in the form of shared experience. Like the self, friendship once formed can maintain itself in abstraction, maintaining pseudo-experiences in the form of memories and imagination. How long friendships can maintain themselves in such a manner is dependent, at least in part, on how much the individuals have changed over this time. Bourdieu's concept of habitus and field are useful to frame questions of how durable and transposable the selves which initiated the friendship might be, and how significant a change might have to be before the selves maintaining the friendship become what Bourdieu might call maladapted to one another. Should core elements of these selves remain, especially the core elements which attracted them as friends, then one could see someone after years of hibernation like nothing had changed. However, if core elements of a self have changed, then reuniting would likely be a hollow experience, with the newfound lack of similarity undermining the objectified self-understanding one previously held of the friendship in question. Having discussed briefly the phenomenon of friendship, I will now turn to the important field that they can develop in, role-playing games. Fine argues that role-playing games tend to represent a hybrid of war games, educational simulation games, and folie à deux. Well, Koziatsevitz qualifies that they're less competition and more akin to the childhood play of make-believe. The basic idea is that several people come together with the goal of living out a story, which can range from very structured, where you know that character X will fall down the hole in chapter 3 and there's nothing you can do about it, to semi-structured, like a choose-your-own-adventure book, or entirely unstructured, determined only by the imaginative horizons of the players and the game master. Regardless of structure, Mead and McIntyre posit that role-playing represents a very human phenomenon of creating and maintaining narratives. In RPGs, as in life, the role one takes on is only intelligible within a narrative context where roles exist and are sensical. McIntyre conceptualizes human life as a narrative unity, and it's only through a series of historically contextualized, overlapping, and ongoing narratives that selfhood becomes intelligible. Role-playing, then, is in essence a collective process of co-authored storytelling by ways of various, often fantastical, roles, pursued both for individual and collective enjoyment. Now, this intersection between individual and collective enjoyment in role-playing is important because friendships are most likely to develop in spaces of shared experience which have been sought for one's own pleasure. If multiple people share interests that are lived out in a particular area of experience, then friendship is more likely to form than if individuals without interest similarities happen to share an experience. As a tangible space to have experience similarities and share interest similarities, friendships are likely to cement and continue through the intimate shared storytelling of a tabletop role-playing game. As examples of such cementation and continuity, I'll now present the cases of Wolf and Cyprix. Wolf was a friend of a friend, and they entered my campaign as a casual friend who occasionally I shared experience similarities with in the form of video games. While some of the people I played video games with were also regularly members of my campaigns, and so Wolf knew them, the role-playing game provided a different space, a different type of space for interaction with myself and with them. It was through the simultaneously wider and deeper space of role-playing games that Wolf gained access to me and others in a temporally continuous shared experience, which allowed our interests and ourselves to interact. It was through the regularity of meeting for approximately 4 hours bi-weekly for a shared experience which simultaneously provided a focus for enjoyment and a space for cooperative narrative creation that the interest similarities between individuals became more apparent than they would in many other social spaces. Wolf thus represents a friendship which further developed due to the experience similarity of the role-playing game, moving from casual further to close. RPGs also provide a space for the maintenance of friendship. Cyprix is someone I consider a close friend and have for many years, despite detesting them when I first met. Years later, however, I consider them further on the best side of the friend spectrum. This was largely developed through digital interaction, through role-playing games and video games. Because of our schedules, RPGs have become our most regular form of interaction and our primary means of maintaining our friendship. Tabletop role-playing games arguably provide a space with more breadth and depth for living out the narrative unity of one's friendship and self than other spaces, which focus on more immediate, temporally constricted concerns, including many video games, but also many sports. The temporal breadth of RPGs often represents a combination of extended interaction and narrative continuity over time, providing a wider range of potential interest similarities being discovered in the process. The narrative depth of RPGs creates an intimate, participatory space for cooperative storytelling, which strengthens our bonds through shared experiences. These advantages of RPGs have, since their origins, largely lived out in person. But as Fitzsimmons notes, since COVID-19, the digitalization of these in-person spaces has been a frequent phenomenon. I had adapted my tabletop role-playing games to the digital world prior to COVID-19, largely in response to busy schedules and time-space distanciation. And so I was better prepared to maintain friendships, as well as my sanity, through the isolation of lockdowns and distances. The adaptation of many others was much more sudden, and it was in this time of digital TRPGs and my GMing therein that Wolf and Cyprix joined my campaigns. Using RPGs as a digital space for experience similarity and interest similarity allowed for a circumvention of the very real physical restrictions of COVID-19, as well as physical distance. Indeed, RPGs provide a more solid, focused, and shared experience than the internet qua internet, and in so doing help forge and sustain personal ties with the potential to develop into varying levels of friendship, even with others with whom one was potentially previously unacquainted. When I describe RPGs as a more focused experience via the internet, I mean that RPGs remain collective experiences, narratives that remain works in progress in the hands of many co-authors represented by the players and the GM. This differs from many internet spaces like social media and some video games, where the connections between individuals are loose and do not promote the kind of storytelling interactions which make for solid experience similarities, the kind required for friendship. The preliminary conclusions that can be drawn from my autoethnographic experience as a GM prior to and during COVID-19 is that moving tabletop role-playing games into a digital space helps provide a focused space of experience similarity which is otherwise not represented in many other digital spaces, provides a means for the development and maintenance of friendship in circumstances when individuals are cut off from most other means, And the digitalization of tabletop role-playing games also provides a means of circumventing many of the issues of the contemporary world in keeping with the range and accessibility of the internet, allowing for the living out of friendships to continue despite distance, lockdowns, schedules, etc. Well, there's much room for future research into adult friendships and their relationships to online interactions, especially through the medium of games. I hope to have provided two useful elements in this work: an account of the development, maintenance, and range of friendship which can be deployed in future works, and an account of how RPGs, both face-to-face and digital, can provide an excellent space for this development and maintenance of friendship on all ends of the spectrum. Thank you.